My name is Samuel Rodriguez, and I'm 74 years old, sitting here alone in my small San Diego apartment, staring at a bank statement that shows $18 where there used to be $68,000 in retirement savings, because for 7 years I gave my gambling-addicted son every penny I had, believing that love and money could save him from destroying himself. 2 months ago, I finally gave Danny the ultimatum I should have given years earlier. Choose gambling or choose your father, but you can't have both. And he looked me in the eyes and chose a casino over the man who had sacrificed everything to keep him afloat. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me shows how addiction can destroy not just the addict, but everyone who loves them, and how sometimes the hardest choice is knowing when to stop enabling someone you can't save. Let me start by telling you about the son I thought I was helping, so you can understand how a father's love can become the very thing that enables destruction. Danny was born in 1983. My only child was my late wife, Maria, a beautiful baby who came into the world with bright eyes and an infectious smile that could melt your heart from across the room. From his earliest days, Danny was special, not just to us, but to everyone who met him. Maria and I raised Danny in a modest 3-bedroom house in Chula Vista, where I worked as a foreman for a construction company, and Maria taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, able to provide Danny with everything he needed and most of what he wanted, while still saving money for his college education and our retirement. Danny was an intelligent, charismatic child who excelled in school and sports. He played baseball and basketball, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and was popular with both teachers and classmates. Maria and I were proud of the young man he was becoming, and excited about the bright future that seemed to stretch out before him. After high school, Danny earned a partial scholarship to San Diego State University, where he studied business administration and continued playing baseball for college team. Those were good years when Danny would come home on weekends and holidays, full of stories about his classes, his teammates, and his plans for starting his own business after graduation. It was during his junior year at college that Danny first discovered gambling. What started as occasional trips to the nearby tribal casino with friends gradually became a more frequent activity that Danny described as a fun way to relax and socialize after the stress of exams and baseball practice. At first, Maria and I weren't concerned about Danny's gambling, because he talked about it casually, mentioning wins and losses in small amounts that seemed harmless enough for a college student. He would tell us about winning $50 on a slot machine or losing 20 at blackjack, amounts that seemed insignificant compared to his part-time job income and scholarship money. But during Danny's senior year, we began to notice changes in his behavior and financial situation that should have been warning signs of a developing problem. He started asking for money more frequently, claiming unexpected expenses related to school or baseball. He seemed more anxious and distracted during family visits, and his grades began to slip from his previous high standards. Maria was the first to suspect that Danny's gambling might be becoming problematic. She noticed that he was evasive when asked about his activities, and that he seemed preoccupied with checking his phone constantly, behaviors that were new and concerning. When she suggested that maybe he was spending too much time at the casino, Danny became defensive and assured us that everything was under control. Danny graduated from college in 2005 with a business degree and immediately found work as a sales representative for a medical equipment company. The job paid well and offered good advancement opportunities, and Danny seemed excited about beginning his professional career. Maria and I were relieved that his college phase was over and that he was settling into adult responsibilities. For the first few years after graduation, Danny appeared to be thriving. He was successful at his job, earning commissions that allowed him to rent a nice apartment and drive a new car. He dated seriously and talked about marriage and starting a family. Maria and I began to relax and assume that any gambling issues from college had been left behind. But in 2008, during the economic recession, Danny's sales performance began to suffer as hospitals and medical practices cut back on equipment purchases. His income dropped significantly, and he struggled to maintain the lifestyle he had become accustomed to during the boom years of his early career. It was during this stressful period that Danny's gambling escalated from occasional entertainment to compulsive behavior. Faced with financial pressure and career uncertainty, he began spending more time at casinos, chasing losses with bigger bets and falling into the classic pattern of addiction that would define the next 15 years of his life. The first time Danny asked me for money was in late 2008, when he claimed that a delayed commission payment had left him short on rent. He needed $800 and promised to pay me back as soon as his next check arrived. Maria and I were happy to help our son through a temporary financial difficulty, especially during such uncertain economic times. But the temporary assistance became a regular pattern as Danny's gambling losses grew larger and more frequent. Every few months, he would call with a new emergency: car repairs, medical bills, credit card payments, or unexpected expenses that required immediate financial help. Each request was accompanied by detailed explanations and promises of repayment that seemed reasonable and sincere. Maria began to suspect that Danny's financial problems were related to gambling, but he always had convincing explanations for his money troubles that deflected attention from his casino activities. When she confronted him directly about gambling, he admitted to occasional visits, but insisted that his financial problems were due to work-related issues and bad luck with unexpected expenses. I want to believe Danny's explanations because the alternative was too painful to accept. The thought that my son was lying to me and stealing money to fund a gambling addiction was something I couldn't bear to acknowledge. It was easier to believe that he was going through a rough patch and needed family support to get back on his feet. Over the next several years, the amount and frequency of Danny's requests for money continued to increase. What started as occasional loans of a few $100s became monthly requests for thousands. By 2012, I had given Danny over $20,000, money that came from our savings and retirement accounts. Maria became increasingly concerned about the pattern of financial assistance and the impact it was having on our own security. She pointed out that Danny never seemed to repay the loans as promised, and that his financial crises were becoming more frequent and severe rather than improving over time. In 2013, Maria was diagnosed with breast cancer, and our focus shifted entirely to her treatment and recovery. During the 18 months of her illness, Danny seemed to rally and provide emotional support for both of us. He visited regularly, helped with medical appointments, and appeared to be managing his own life more responsibly. But I later learned that Danny had simply become more secretive about his gambling and more creative about finding money to fund his addiction. While Maria and I were focused on her cancer treatment, Danny had taken out multiple credit cards, borrowed money from friends and coworkers, and even sold personal belongings to support his casino activities. Maria died in early 2015, and her loss devastated both Danny and me. During the months of grief that followed, Danny and I leaned on each other for emotional support, and I was grateful to have my son during the darkest period of my life. He seemed to understand my pain and was present in ways that comforted me and made me feel less alone. But I now realize that Danny was also using my grief and emotional vulnerability to increase his access to money. He positioned himself as my primary caregiver and support system, which gave him opportunities to ask for financial help without the skeptical oversight that Maria had provided. The requests for money resumed shortly after Maria's funeral, but now they were framed as assistance for both of us rather than just for Danny's personal needs. He suggested that we pool our resources to save money on living expenses, or that he needed help with costs related to caring for me and managing my affairs. I was so grateful for Danny's presence and support during my grief that I didn't question his financial requests or examine them critically. I gave him money for groceries, utilities, car repairs, and various emergencies without asking for receipts or documentation. I wanted to trust my son and to believe that we were helping each other through a difficult time. By 2017, I had given Danny nearly $40,000 since Maria's death, money that represented a significant portion of my retirement savings. I was beginning to worry about my own financial security, especially as I approached my 70th birthday and considered the possibility of needing long-term care or assistance. When I expressed concerns about money, Danny assured me that he was keeping track of everything and would repay me when his financial situation improved. He talked about a promotion at work or a business opportunity that would allow him to become more financially stable and help support me in my old age. But Danny's promises were always followed by new emergencies and requests for additional money. His car would break down, his apartment would need repairs, or he would have medical expenses that insurance didn't cover. Each crisis seemed legitimate and urgent, requiring immediate financial assistance that couldn't wait for future repayment. I began to notice that Danny's appearance and behavior were changing in ways that concerned me. He looked tired and stressed, had lost weight, and seemed anxious and distracted during our visits. When I asked about his health and well-being, he blamed work stress and the lingering effects of grief over Maria's death. In 2019, I accidentally discovered the truth about Danny's gambling addiction when I answered his phone while he was in the bathroom during one of his visits. The caller was someone from a casino asking about Danny's credit line and when he planned to make a payment on his outstanding balance. When I confronted Danny about the phone call, he initially tried to deny that he had gambling debts, but eventually broke down and admitted that he had been struggling with addiction for years. He claimed that he had been trying to get help and that he was ashamed of his behavior, but didn't know how to stop. Danny's confession was devastating, but also somewhat relieving, as it finally explained the pattern of financial crises and requests for money that had characterized our relationship for over a decade. For the first time, I understood that my son was sick and that his constant need for money was a symptom of addiction rather than genuine emergencies. I immediately began researching gambling addiction and treatment options, determined to help Danny overcome his disease and rebuild his life. I found information about Gamblers Anonymous, residential treatment programs, and counseling services that specialize in addiction recovery. Danny agreed to seek treatment and seemed genuinely motivated to change his life. He attended GA meetings, met with a counselor, and talked about the relief he felt from finally being honest about his addiction. I was hopeful that we had turned a corner and that my financial support could now go toward legitimate recovery rather than enabling continued gambling. But Danny's recovery attempts were short-lived and superficial. He would attend a few meetings or counseling sessions, then gradually drift away from treatment while claiming that he was doing well and didn't need as much support. Meanwhile, the request for money continued, now framed as assistance with recovery-related expenses or basic living costs while he focused on getting better. I wanted to believe that Danny was making progress, but his behavior suggested that he was still gambling and still lying about his activities. He would disappear for days without explanation, avoid answering direct questions about his whereabouts, and continue to have financial crises that required immediate assistance. The cycle of false hope and renewed disappointment was emotionally exhausting and financially devastating. By 2021, I had given Danny nearly all of my retirement savings, over $60,000 that represented decades of careful planning and sacrifice. I was living on Social Security alone and had no financial cushion for emergencies or unexpected expenses. My own health was declining, with arthritis and high blood pressure that required ongoing medical care. The stress of Danny's addiction and the financial strain of supporting him were taking a toll on my physical and mental well-being. I was becoming the victim of my son's disease, as much as he was. Friends and neighbors began expressing concern about my situation and suggesting that I was enabling Danny's gambling rather than helping him recover. They pointed out that my financial support was allowing him to continue gambling without facing the natural consequences of his addiction. I knew they were right, but the thought of cutting off financial support felt like abandoning my son when he needed me most. Danny was my only child, my only family, and the idea of letting him become homeless or face serious legal consequences was unbearable. I couldn't imagine choosing money over my relationship with my son. But in early 2023, I reached a point where I literally couldn't afford to continue supporting Danny's addiction. My savings were exhausted, my credit card were maxed out, and I was struggling to pay for my own basic needs, including rent, utilities, and medication. The final crisis came in March when Danny asked for $5,000 to cover what he claimed were legal fees related to a work dispute. He insisted that this would be the last time he needed money, and that resolving this issue would allow him to stabilize his career and begin repaying everything he owed me. But I had heard similar promises dozens of times before, and I no longer believed that Danny was capable of honesty about money or gambling. I realized that continuing to give him financial support was not helping him recover, but was actually making his addiction worse while destroying my own security. I made the most difficult decision of my life and told Danny that I couldn't give him any more money. I explained that I had reached the limit of my financial resources and that I needed to preserve what little I had left for my own survival. I suggested that he contact his employer's assistance program or seek help from social services. Danny's response was angry and desperate. He accused me of abandoning him when he needed me most and claimed that $5,000 was nothing compared to what parents should be willing to sacrifice for their children. He said that my refusal to help would destroy his life and potentially leave him homeless or in legal trouble. When I stood firm in my decision, Danny became manipulative and threatening. He suggested that Maria would be ashamed of me for refusing to help our son, and he implied that he might do something drastic if I didn't provide the money he needed. But I had reached a point where I could no longer respond to emotional blackmail. I gave Danny an ultimatum that I should have given years earlier. I told him that he had to choose between gambling and having a relationship with me. If he was willing to enter a serious treatment program and commit to recovery, I would support him emotionally even though I couldn't help financially. But if he continued gambling and lying, I would have to protect myself by ending our relationship. Danny's choice was immediate and heartbreaking. He told me that I obviously didn't love him or understand what he was going through, and that he would find other ways to solve his problems. He said that our relationship was conditional and unfair, and that a real father would never abandon his son regardless of the circumstances. That was the last conversation I had with Danny 3 months ago. He has not called, texted, or visited since that day, choosing his addiction over any relationship with his father. I learned from a mutual acquaintance that Danny was evicted from his apartment and has been staying with various friends while continuing to gamble with money borrowed from anyone willing to lend it. The silence from Danny has been painful, but also somewhat peaceful. For the first time in years, I'm not waiting for the next crisis call or wondering how much money I'll need to find for the next emergency. I'm living on a tight budget, but managing to cover my basic needs without the constant drain of supporting someone else's addiction. I've also connected with support groups for families of addicts, where I've learned that my experience is unfortunately common. Many parents, spouses, and siblings struggle with the decision of when to stop enabling addictive behavior and how to maintain relationships with people whose disease makes them manipulative and dishonest. But something unexpected happened last month that gave me a glimpse of hope that I hadn't felt in years. I received a phone call from Dr. Patricia Martinez, a counselor who specializes in gambling addiction treatment. She explained that Danny had been admitted to hospital after being severely beaten by people he owed money to, and that during his recovery, he had asked her to contact me. Dr. Martinez told me that Danny's near-death experience had finally broken through his denial about the severity of his addiction and the consequences of his behavior. For the first time, he was expressing genuine remorse about the harm he had caused and was asking for help with serious treatment rather than just money to continue gambling. Danny had specifically asked Dr. Martinez to tell me that he understood why I had cut off financial support and that he didn't blame me for protecting myself from his addiction. He wanted me to know that he loved me and was sorry for the pain he had caused, but that he understood if I couldn't trust him or have a relationship with him anymore. Dr. Martinez explained that Danny was entering a long-term residential treatment program that would last 6 to 12 months and would focus on both addiction recovery and repairing damaged relationships. She asked if I would be willing to participate in family therapy sessions once Danny had made sufficient progress in his individual treatment. The invitation to potentially rebuild a relationship with Danny was both hopeful and terrifying. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that he was finally ready for real change and that we might be able to have an honest, healthy relationship for the first time in years. But another part of me was afraid of being manipulated again and of falling back into the pattern of enabling that had nearly destroyed my own life. I agreed to stay in contact with Dr. Martinez and to consider family therapy once Danny had demonstrated sustained commitment to recovery. I made it clear that any future relationship would have to be based on honesty and mutual respect, and that I would never again provide financial support regardless of the circumstances. Today, 6 weeks after that initial phone call, Danny has remained in treatment and is reportedly making good progress in understanding his addiction and developing coping strategies. Dr. Martinez provides me with weekly updates about his treatment, and slowly, I'm beginning to hope that my son might finally be ready to choose recovery over gambling. I don't know if Danny and I will ever have a normal father-son relationship, and I'm prepared for the possibility that his addiction may prove stronger than his desire to change. But for the first time in years, I have hope that the son I raise might still exist underneath the disease that has controlled his life for so long. The experience has taught me that loving someone with an addiction sometimes means setting boundaries that feel cruel, but are actually necessary for both people's survival. It has also shown me that recovery is possible, even from the most destructive addictions, but only when the addict chooses healing over the substance or behavior that has become their master. I'm still living on a tight budget and may never recover the money I gave Danny over the years, but I've regained something more valuable: my self-respect and the knowledge that I can make difficult decisions to protect myself even when they cause pain to someone I love. That strength will serve me well regardless of what the future holds for my relationship with my son. That's my story. How my gambling-addicted son chose casinos over his father and left me broke and alone in my old age, but how his rock bottom became the beginning of possible redemption for both of us. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destruction, even when it breaks your heart to walk away.